My name is Wally Cabrera, and I'm the group coordinator of Amnesty International on campus. I'd like to welcome everyone today to not only celebrate Amnesty's second year, but also the 50th anniversary of Amnesty International worldwide. And what better way to celebrate both of those occasions than with the usual activism that Amnesty is known for. So we're going to be talking about this entire academic year and today the Demand Dignity campaign, which deals all with the concept of poverty and human rights. So we have Professor Richard Wolff and Professor Sanjay Reddy today speaking, both economists. You're going to get a very economic perspective. And just a little bit about the Demand Dignity campaign of Amnesty. They believe that everyone, everywhere, has the right to live with dignity. No one should be denied their rights to adequate housing, food, water, sanitation, education, and health care. And these are issues that are not only global, but very national. Everywhere you go, in New York City and any part of the US and the world, you can see poverty. And then certain parts of poverty that are a little bit more invisible. So now I'm going to give the speakers' bios, and then they can take the floor. So Professor Richard Wolff is a visiting professor in the graduate program for international affairs. He writes, speaks, and does media interviews on current economic crisis and related issues, most of which are posted and available at rdwolff.com. He also hosts a weekly hour-long radio program in New York called Economic Update on WBAI 99.5 FM every Saturday at noon, so check it out. And Professor Reddy, he is Associate Professor of Economics at the New School for Social Research. His area of expertise includes development economics, international economics, and philosophy. He's a member of the advisory panel of the UNDP's Human Development Report, a UN Statistics Division Steering Committee on Poverty and Statistics, and also on the board of the UN Special Rapporteur on Right to Food. He's also a member of many other boards, of which he'll be happy to talk to anyone who's interested in. And so Wolff will take the floor first. And at the end of both of their presentations, we'll open the floor to questions and comments. So thank you.
Okay, I want to comment on the introduction of me and my colleague here as economists. I know your heart probably sinks at the thought that made some of your fellow students decide not even to come. But I suspect that we can make it more interesting than economics usually is. In my experience, it's not even interesting to the economists who do it most of the time, let alone to those subjected to their speeches. So I'll try to break with that mold. I'm going to focus most of my comments on two things. One, poverty here in the United States, even though obviously it's a global problem and severe all over the world. But there's something particularly important about making it local and overcoming the absurd notion that it isn't a serious problem in the United States, and indeed one that's getting worse. And the other part I'm going to focus on is the relationship between poverty and capitalism. So let me first talk a little bit about poverty in the United States. And here I'm going to draw on the most recent report by the US Census Bureau, which you can find through Google and check out the details. But a few weeks ago, they issued a report on poverty in the United States. And I thought I'd just mention a few of the things that came out of that report to you. All the data are based on 2010. That's the last full year for which information is known. And the cutoff line, the poverty line, what defines poverty for the United States Census Bureau, is an income of $22,314 per year for a family of four. Let me repeat that. $22,000 per year for four people. So I did the arithmetic. In my profession, arithmetic is a sign of intelligence. Failure to do things in the way of arithmetic is a sign of the absence of intelligence. Whole careers are based on this sort of thing. And I did the arithmetic, and this works out to $15 per day per person to cover everything. Food, clothing, shelter, education, medical care, you name it. $15. So you couldn't possibly have a couple of lattes in an average day since you drop dead at the end of that day as a result. So let's see what they said about a cutoff point of $15 per person per day. By their numbers, the U.S. Census Department, there are 46.2 million people in the United States who don't even have $15 a day, or 15.1% of our people. Better than 1 out of 7 Americans are poor by this standard. The standard is, of course, absurd. So it would be much more reasonable to double it, but I won't even do that. I'll just go to 25%. Instead of 15%, I'll show that if you made a reasonable cutoff at several $1,000s more, we're talking about 1 in 4 Americans are really poor. Couldn't possibly have the list of things that Amnesty International believes are relevant that you read off to us at the beginning. And I would estimate, that's another thing we do as economists, that another 1 in 4, besides the 1 in 4 that really are very poor, should be real worried these days about joining the first 1 in 4 to make us have 2 out of 4, which is half. Why? Well, we have long-lasting and high unemployment. The way market economies typically work is if you have an awful lot of people out of work, it emboldens employers to be rather loose with their workers in terms of taking away benefits and taking away gains and offering lower wages, because they know, like the workers do, that if you don't accept these conditions, you can go out there and get nothing. So you accept. So if I were a worker, fortunately I don't have this problem, but if I were a worker, I would be nervous these days, as I think most Americans are, and are in fact accepting what we see across the board. Reduction of wages, reduction of benefits, left and right. Over the last few years, if you're not familiar, pensions in the United States have simply been removed from millions of workers or changed from a kind of old-time guarantee of a certain amount you could retire on that were called defined benefit pension systems, and they were shifted to something called defined contribution benefit systems. There, what the employer does is contribute a certain amount of money each year to your pension, but no obligation on the part of the employer as to what you get at the end. So if you invest that money in the stock market, which a lot of companies encourage their workers to do, and if the stock market has a bad few years, like for example, I don't know, the last few, then you are screwed. And you retire on next to nothing. Amazing system to reform. We also have an economy in which large numbers of people, by the way, unemployment statistic, if you're interested to look at in this country, is something called U6. The Bureau of Labor Statistics keeps all these different kinds of employment numbers. U6 is the relevant one. Counts the number of people who are looking for work and not finding it, the number of people who have been looking for a long time and stopped looking, and third, the number of people who have a part-time job, but involuntarily because they'd rather have a full-time job. That's numbering somewhere in the neighborhood of 24 to 25 million Americans are in those situations, U6, and therefore not earning much, if anything. And so they're not in a position to buy real nice quantities of goods and services. People these days have been unemployed longer than typical in American economic history. So they've used up their savings. They literally no longer can spend on anything or must become major burdens on their family. If you look at the U6 number, it's roughly 16.5%. 1 out of 6 Americans is in this situation. That means every single family either has a husband, a wife, a daughter, a niece, or somebody in that situation. If you're unemployed for a long time, you're becoming a major drag on your family and friends. They may not tell you that, but they do feel it. And these are all signs that the 1/4 of our population that isn't poor by a reasonable standards is well on its way to joining that group. So that's half. So the idea that poverty is not a problem in the United States requires a leap of faith that normally only Republicans can easily manage. And this is not new in the United States. The poverty tends to be hidden. The United States is a very well-organized society to render poverty relatively hard to notice or at least it's easy to miss it. We segregate our communities. You all know where in New York City you're not supposed to go, particularly in the evening. Those are those places. And so you all know where they are, even if you pretend that we don't. And we have our suburbs are organized. Most American cities have the suburbs where the nice people live, and then the suburbs where the poor people live. Everybody knows what they are. So it's just a question of you recalling what you already know, bring it from the back of your mind up to the forward front, and you all know about the poverty anyway. It's severe in the United States, always has been, and is more severe now because, as always happens, and here's my transition to a discussion of capitalism, the capitalist system is a stunningly unstable system. It bounces around all the time. We are now in the middle of the second major collapse of capitalism in the United States in 75 years. The last one was the 1930s. Between the end of the 1930s depression, around 1940-41, and the beginning of the current disaster in 2007, the National Bureau of Economic Research counts 11 other economic downturns. So this is a system whose instability is extraordinary. And every one of those downturns, the shallow, short ones and the long, deep ones, throws millions of people out of work and adds stunningly to the poverty problem. If it's not clear in your mind, it's because intellectually we have the same hiding process that we do in the organization of our communities. We forget poverty periodically, and then we have a stunning moment of recognizing, oh my God, there's a lot of poor people. I remember when I was younger, around your age, I was caught up in one of those, and typically the same kind of people are discovering poverty periodically. But in the 1960s, around 1960, an American socialist, in those days, in the 1960s, it's not good to be an American socialist. Most people who were socialists tried very hard to pretend that they weren't, many with great success. But one of them, Michael Harrington, head of the American Socialist Party, wrote a famous book, and it was called, as these books usually are, The Other America. And in this book, came as a bombshell, it was exposed that the United States had really two countries inside it. One that was comfortable and well off, and another one that was piss poor, and he introduced the American readers to the piss poor. Since the people who typically buy books are not in the community, and the people who are in the community do not typically buy books, this was a discovery of people who were fundamentally estranged from one another, and it was exciting for the readers to discover that there really was this sort of thing, and it was very successful. It came at the right moment. We had imagined not to have poverty for a long time, so this new idea was really exciting and led to the war on poverty, a war that the United States waged for many, many years, with about the same success that the United States has waged in most of its wars, such as the current disasters in Iraq or Afghanistan, the same hyped media event underlying which failure. And so the war on poverty, like previous efforts, was lost. The poor won, they remained, they grew, and the war abated because after a while nobody had the stomach and nobody wanted to pay for it. So poverty is a fundamental problem, not only of the United States now and throughout its history, but it has always been a problem, at least for the last several hundred years, of which the dominant economic system has been capitalism. So it's a reasonable hypothesis, and this is the second half of my brief talk, it's a reasonable hypothesis that if capitalism shows that poverty stays, then we ought to have a hypothesis there may be some relationship between capitalism and the way it functions and the poverty that remains with us. I am not unmindful that the first time that most of us hear the phrase, the poor are always with us, does not come from a capitalist document, but comes rather from the Bible. And so that indicates that poverty is rather older than capitalism. I recognize that. I do not want to blame capitalism for poverty. I do want to blame capitalism for having done exactly nothing to deal with this problem, even though it was born in a claim built around the French and other revolutions that the arrival of capitalism would finally put an end to the grinding poverty that had characterized other economic systems. Whatever you think about capitalism, it did not deliver on that promise. We have lots and lots of horrific poverty now, and we reproduce it. So that would be my argument. capitalism as a system is as successful in reproducing poverty as it is in reproducing wealth.